You're watching the History Fella channel. In this video we're looking at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. To many military strategists and politicians in the South, in 1864, after the defeat of the Army of Northern Virginia at Gettysburg the previous summer, the ambition to invade the North in order to force a peace settlement was now abandoned. What replaced it was a desire to maintain the military ability to contest and hold what southern territory they had, and beat off sustained federal attacks, whether in the eastern or western theatres. It would become a war of attrition that perhaps might inflict such casualties for the North that public opinion might force Washington to potentially seek an armistice. For this to have any chance of success, the two key targets for the Union, Richmond, Virginia, and Atlanta, Georgia, had to be beaten off, at the very least until the upcoming US elections that November, when Lincoln might well be defeated. If either city fell before that, then the Confederacy would most likely be doomed. In what would later be titled the Atlanta Campaign, Major General William T. Sherman would lead his three armies of the Cumberland, Tennessee, and Ohio into Georgia to capture the city, with the intention of bringing the main Confederate Army of the Tennessee, led by Major General Joseph E. Johnston, to battle. Faced with an overwhelming superiority in men and supplies, Johnston was fully aware that the Union forces could beat his army on the battlefield. The skill was to make a successful fighting retreat, to keep them away from Atlanta, and hope a tactical opportunity might arise to inflict enough casualties to stall their advance. Sherman, for his part, was eager not to waste his men's lives by throwing them against layers of prepared Confederate defences. Sherman's forces instead had opted to outflank them with sweeping manoeuvres. For over 70 miles throughout May and most of June, Johnston's army was compelled to give up valuable ground as it faced encirclement from Union thrusts to both its flanks until it had reached the last natural obstacle before Atlanta, Kennesaw Mountain. It was here, with no flanking options left, and despite the formidable Confederate lines to his army's front, that Sherman decided to finally order a frontal assault. He believed it to be the best option to break the Confederate lines, which by now were stretched too thin along an 8-mile line. For the main attack on what would later be named Cheatham Hill to succeed, he would order 2 flank attacks on Pigeon Hill to the north and Ollie's Creek to draw enemy strength away from their centre where the main Union blow would fall. If he broke his line, Sherman believed the destruction of Johnston's army was all but inevitable. On the morning of June the 27th, a 200-gun bombardment attempted to soften up the rebel fortifications before the main attacks went in, but they failed to have the hoped-for impact, and the advancing Union brigades struggled to traverse not only high rocky ground without any cover, but in some places knee-high swampland that thwarted any rapid movement required to attack an enemy. Intense fire from the Confederates inflicted appalling casualties as the lines of blue melted before the waves of musketry. Those that managed to get to the Confederate lines were met with bloody hand-to-hand fighting before being captured or driven back. This was especially so on Pigeon Hill, where the battle was at its fiercest and would later be dubbed Dead Angle by the troops assigned to take it. One brigade losing 2 consecutive commanders, all its field officers, and a third of its men. Overall, despite suffering over 3,000 casualties that morning, compared with Johnston's 1,000 killed or wounded, Sherman was intent on launching fresh attacks still. Warned he might use up his whole army if he tried this again, he instead switched his attention to one success of the day, to the south of the Kennesaw line, where Federal units, including cavalry, had crossed Ollie's Creek and progressed 5 miles to the rear of rebel positions. Ultimately, this would force Johnston to order a retreat once more. The Confederate Army had won the day, but tactically had lost the strategic goal of holding the Federals at such a strong defensive position. Sherman never made the mistake of ordering another frontal assault again. He still retained the men and material to achieve his objectives, and would hold the initiatives all the way to Atlanta, where he would defeat the Army of the Tennessee, led by a new commander, General John Bell Hood, and capture the city on September the 2nd. If you found the information in this video informative or helpful, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel or sharing the channel amongst family and friends. Thank you very much, and I shall see you in the next video.